Success webinar. We're really glad that you joined us. I'm Colette DePhelps. I'm an area extension educator with University of Idaho, and I'm located on the Moscow campus. Joining us today from University of Idaho are Mackenzie Lawrence and Lauren O'Loughlin, who are also with our Cultivating Success program, and they'll be providing some tech support today. I'm really excited that we have 4 guest speakers that are going to be presenting on understanding insurance and liability, and then farm labor, hiring employees, interns, and volunteers. This webinar series is part of the Cultivating Success program, which was established in 2000 by University of Idaho Extension, the nonprofit organization Rural Roots, and Washington State University. Our program focuses on providing education to support the success of sustainable small farms and ranches. We are in session 2 of a 4-part webinar series that's focusing on supporting direct marketing farms and ranches in Idaho. Yesterday, we had a couple of great presentations around direct marketing strategies and business structures that are appropriate for farms and ranches. If you'd like to view those recordings, you can do that from our Cultivating Success website. Today, we're in session 2 talking about insurance and liability and farm labor. And then in another couple weeks, we're going to be doing our 3rd and 4th session. You're welcome to register for all of the sessions, and do know that they are being recorded, so you can also view them at a later date. So I want to jump right into our first topic. We're going to spend the first hour this morning talking about insurance and liability. Very excited that Kurt Allender with American National Insurance is joining us today. He has a really informative presentation, and I want to let you know that the slides from his presentation, as well as those from Diane Green, will be available from the Cultivating Success website as a PDF download. So don't worry about taking notes today. All this information is going to be available to you online. So Kurt is going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to Diane, who's going to share her experience with insurance and liability as a farmer in North Idaho. So with that, Kurt, I'm going to hand the screen over to you to share your slides.
All right, great. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, let's make sure I get the correct screen up here. I think we'll try this screen here. And my screen is sharing properly, correct, Colette?
It is sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for letting me participate here. I know insurance sometimes can be a little bit dry. So if I get a little bit dry, I hope Diane can bring a little liveliness to it and understanding. But I do think it's important that, you know, your insurance and your liability, you know, it's an important part of what you're doing to be successful with your business. So we're going to touch on some of the hot topics that I see currently. And I think when I say I see them, I think you may be seeing them as well as the consumer of an insurance product as well. So I want to start off with the brush fire scores. You know, more recently, we're having more challenges with brush fire challenges throughout the West. With the drought conditions that we're seeing, insurance companies are becoming a little bit more restrictive with everything that's going on from a brush fire perspective. So I did kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that and let you know that you may be starting to see some additional questions that might be coming from your insurance agent. You might be asked to do certain additional things as well. But I wanted to start with just really visit with your insurance person, right? Talk to them and determine whether or not your structures are located in a high brush fire area. And what do I mean by a high brush fire area? Well, from American National perspective, we actually use an outside resource that tells us the brush fire scores that we could anticipate at a facility. And so we use Risk Meter in our example. Not all insurance companies, I mean, they may use a different format, but we use Risk Meter scoring. And when we do that, we punch in your address with your physical facilities, and we will then make a score determination at that point. And in our rule of thumb, and I'm just going to tell you this rule of thumb for us is the score can range anywhere from a 0 to 100, or really from a 1 to 100. So those scores that are 50 or above create more challenges for us as an insurance company. And I feel like it's going to flow across whatever insurance company you're using as well. So I would visit with your insurance provider. They'll probably visit with you in a proactive approach if they're having those concerns. But we're going to come across some of those opportunities that do have higher than the normal accepted brush fire scores. So the second bullet point I'm talking about here is mitigation tools, right? What are some things that you can do to help reduce your fire loss potential? Now, granted, insurance is there to help protect you and help you recover from a loss, but ideally for yourself, anytime you have that loss, it's very stressful on your business and your normal activities. So, things you can do, is look at your high brush area, right? Clear any excess brush away, trim your trees, and keep your dry vegetation back. And I used 100 feet here from insured structures. Just kind of one of the things that we look at. There's kind of three little areas that, there's that immediate area up around the home or the structures we're insuring that, what's going on within a 5-foot radius, and then you expand out and keep going further out. So I've provided a couple hyperlinks for you here. And again, you'll get a PDF of this, but these hyperlinks can really help you with some of the risk mitigation issues as it comes with the brush fire scores. So I wanted to share that one with you. The next one that came up, and I've had the pleasure of speaking to this group in person in Moscow quite a few years ago, prior to COVID. And at that point, we were coming up against this additional insured requirements. In other words, certain people wanted named on our insurance policy to share our limit of liability in the event it is our problem that caused the problem. I know that the Moscow Food Cooperative was one of those examples, okay? And there's multiple ones out there, but that was the one that I remember using back 4 or 5 years ago. And so they're going to be asking for additional insured status on your part. So understanding and reviewing your contracts are extremely important, right? Are you needing required to list third parties with this type of insurable interest? And possibly you may have some people that's listed on your policy that you're no longer doing business with. And are you getting those removed from your policy? Because again, this is where you're sharing your insurance limits with them in the event your product or your services caused a loss. So a couple things to look at to make sure if you get the right people on, and then remove those people that do not need to be on there. Now, I use my second bullet point here, and I know it's a busy bullet point, but what I'm pointing out here is there's a lot of different ways that people can be named as additional insured. And I'm not going to run through all of these specifically, but really there's 11 different ways that you can be listed as a third party on your policy or as additional insured. And so what we come up against as an insurance agency sometimes is a customer will call us up and say, hey, I need to list somebody. Okay, we'll just use Moscow Food Co-op as an example, as additional insured on my policy. And what I'm instructing my agents is, okay, how do they need to be listed, right? And that sometimes is missed initially from the farmer, rancher to their agent is how do they need to be listed. And that should be clearly outlined from you back to the first bullet point of your contract, right? Your agreement with that third party. They should be letting you know how they need to be listed. In Moscow Food Court, as an example, in the close towards the bottom of here, the vendor of your products. That's a real common way that they're going to be listed as an additional insured on your policy. But again, I just wanted to show you there's a lot of different ways people can be listed. And so it's important for you to understand what does your contract or your agreement state so you can properly let your insurance agent know how they need to be listed on the policy. And by the way, their protection is different when you look at this in respects to how we list them. So that's important to get that correctly there. I'm going to move on here to, it really goes in line a little bit with the fact that we're adding third parties, right, to our liability policy limits. But what about adequate liability limits? Are you protected enough with your insurance product to provide protection for your business, right? So I like to use the term, it needs to cover both, right? The costs of the loss, I said the cause of the loss, I should have said the cost of the loss, but even the cause needs to be covered and the cost, but also to allow you enough to remain in business. So that's why it's important to make sure and review your liability limits there. Now, rule of thumb, you know, and this is just me giving you my rule of thumb is, you know, what is enough, right? Well, we want to know enough to cover our assets and our net worth right there for that liability limit. So that should enable you to cover a claim and allow you to maintain your assets and your net worth without dipping into your own pocket and just allowing the insurance to cover and protect you for any of those types of losses. And umbrellas or excess liability, if you haven't thought about an umbrella or excess liability, I encourage you to visit with your insurance agent and go over what does that do for your business. Well, basically that goes over that underlying liability that you have. On your farm package, you have liability. This would go over that with additional protection for you. And it can go over a homeowner's policy. It can go over a personal auto policy or a commercial auto policy. All combined there can go over all of those things. Typically, like American National, we say we need to be the carrier of choice on those underlying policies for our umbrella to go over top. So there's one way of getting that higher umbrella limit. Okay. Now, by doing that, a lot of times you can get more protection, more bang for your buck, so to speak, when considering these higher limits. I'm not going to specifically say what an umbrella would cost you because I don't know that answer, because it all depends on your underlying liability coverages and exposures. But I do know that a small operation, and it's a farm type operation, our minimum umbrella limit for $1 million more is at the bottom, it's $250. Now your cost might be more than that, okay? But really it's only an additional $250 minimum that you may be paying for an additional $1 million of protection. So I would always encourage you to visit with your agent about that umbrella protection. And I even encourage you not just to think of that 1 million, but think of that second million, third million of liability protection too, because a lot of times that cost even shrinks further down. So your cost overall associated with your umbrellas, you get some pretty good bang for the buck to protect your business from those catastrophic type of losses. Okay, on the other thing that's came up come up more recently is this increased cost of building construction, or our insurance to value, right? We've got inflation. Our lumber materials have gone up. They're settling back down a little bit. Limitation on contractor availability is driving up costs. So all of these things are driving costs associated with the cost of replacing your buildings. And so when I say insurance to value, we need to review your policy limits, right? Are you currently on a replacement cost basis, meaning this building goes down, I need to replace the building as it is, right? The same amount of square footage, the same eave heights, the same type, because it worked perfectly for my operation as is. So I won't expect my insurance company to replace that exactly how it was. So that's what a replacement cost is doing for you. And if you don't have the right insurance to value on it, you may not be able to get that building replaced like you want. Now, actual cash value is another coverage option, and basically it is the replacement cost minus depreciation is what actual cash value means. And insurance companies typically will not depreciate a building value less than 50% of the replacement cost, even though you might in your books replace it 70%, 80%, or maybe even all the way to 100%. From an insurance company perspective, they don't typically go below the 50% there on the replacement. So why would ACV be an option? Well, a couple of reasons. One, insurance companies want it that way, okay? If it's an older, it's not updated, or it's got some wear and tear on it, insurance companies said, listen, it's not in a condition that we feel comfortable with offering replacement cost on it. So sometimes the insurance company will do it. But I want to really focus about really what you guys' intent are with buildings. Sometimes a building is there, let's say it's 40, 50 years ago, and it's used in a different capacity now than what it was originally built for. Okay, and it was overbuilt for your today's use. So in the event you lost that, what would be your intent? Would you rebuild the building? Would you rebuild a different type of building? Or would you just want to take the cash money and invest it somewhere else in your business? Okay. When you think about replace it with something smaller, replace it with different type of construction that's less expensive, or if you're going to take the cash money and use that for something else in your business, actual cash value is a pretty good option for you. Okay, so just keep that in mind and have that discussion with your insurance agent as well. Now, I'm just telling you, when I say replacement cost value and when I say insurance to value, and that we're seeing some challenges with the proper limits there. I have seen some value of buildings being extremely low compared to the true replacement cost, 30 to 50% below where they need to be. So that's one of the things you want to keep an eye out for. You could have a policy on replacement cost. Most of you probably do. But is that value actually enough to replace what you have there? So I'm seeing that as one of the hot topics we're talking about as well. Okay, insurance companies' appetite, different appetite amongst the different carriers, right? Certain companies like certain things, different companies like something different. I'm just giving you a couple examples here. Poultry, and I see you're going to have a class on poultry about difference between meat processing, meat chickens processed, and then also egg layers as an example. So, you know, free range egg layers, a lot of insurance companies are perfectly fine with that. We're perfectly fine with that. Okay, a commercial egg layer that have the chickens in a confined cage, that's really not, that doesn't meet our appetite. But really, you get into the meat chicken processed on the farm, that gives a lot of insurance companies challenges. It gives us a lot of challenge. I want you to be aware of that, right? If you're doing your own processing of the chicken on the farm, it's more difficult to find insurance companies that's willing to take that risk on. Now, I want you to think about, if you're in that business, how else can I modify my business practice to allow me to continue to operate in the fashion I am? Maybe I want to partner with, right, an independent processor. In other words, let the actual processor handle that processing of my meat. And then when it's processed, I can come back then and sell that prepackaged poultry with my label on it at my farm. And in those situations, we find that acceptable, as I think other insurance companies will find that acceptable as well. So you're expanding your opportunity there with your insurance choices by placing that risk outside and not doing that processing yourself. Just something to think about. And raw milk has come up as well, and we're really challenged in that area as well as the industry goes there. Some companies will allow it if it's very incidental to your overall farm exposure. Our words is if it's incidental, we'll take some of that on, but we still need you to have at least 3 years of experience and actually already have coverage, insurance coverage for raw milk in another insurance company format there. So those are just a couple examples of some challenges that we're seeing that you want to look at. And then the agritainment world, right? Agritainment can take on a varied approach to it. Some people can do very minimal amount of agritainment. Some people get very broad with everything that they do. I just threw up the agritainment one definition that's thrown up there, but there can be a lot of different variables that comes with it. Okay, so it's important to review this with your insurance provider, right? What is it that you're doing on your farm? Do you host or run the activities, or does a third party host it? The ambience of your facility allow somebody to come in and they want to have a wedding venue. Okay, those are important things to understand. Are you actually the host, or is somebody else the host? And what kind of contracts do you have in place? If somebody else is hosting it, you would want to probably get some additional insured status on their insurance policy, so you're protected in the event the guests they invite to your property, right, and something happens to them, they're coming for their event on your property, you would want to be protected in those situations. I think one of the areas where we can really help each other, right, from the insurance industry and you as the client, is what are you looking at expanding in your agritainment offerings, and have that discussion early in the process before we jump into it, okay? Because the last thing you want to do is jump into doing something, insurance isn't aware of it, and then once insurance becomes aware of it, now we might have an insurability challenge, okay? So always think ahead of time when your plan is, include your insurance person to have those discussions on what might go on, okay? And specifically throwing you out a couple examples here, underwriting concerns that we might come across. Yeah, what if we're doing pumpkin cannons or slings? Underwriters are going to want to know, what's the proximity to roadways, right? Tell us a little bit about that employee supervision that's going on. Do we have just one cannon, or do we have multiple cannons going on? So there's a lot of different types of questions that you probably by yourself are not thinking of all those situations. That's why you want to work closely with your insurance partner to get that. Corn maze is another example there. Are they daylight hours only? Are they haunted? What about children? Are they being escorted throughout the maze and everything? So just a couple examples there I wanted to share with you. Okay, I'm summary here. And Diane, I apologize if I'm running long. I don't know if I'm running long or if I'm fast here, but full disclosure of everything. I think it's important for you to ensure you're properly protected, right? Your insurance company is a business partner with you, okay? And it's important that we have very full disclosure, both from the insurance company as saying, here's what we like, here's what we don't like, here's ways we can help improve your risk, right, to make it more attractive, some of those challenges there. But really what you're doing out there, make sure your insurance company fully is aware of everything that you're doing. We talked about expansion plans, right? Plan ahead. If you're going to do something different, let's talk with your insurance person so they're aware of that going on, and they can, again, give you some suggestions and some things to look out for, and some considerations that you might not have thought about, especially as it comes to your liability associated with doing those things. Establishing those those proper values, right? What would it take? What type of protection do I need, right? And then what type of liability protection also do I need? What am I most comfortable with? Is it to my advantage to maybe look at an umbrella to make sure I have higher liability limits? Brush fire scores, what can you do to mitigate those exposures? Again, I gave you some links there that will help you as well in that regard. And then, of course, the additional insured status, right? Is there a contract in place? I showed you 13 different ways that somebody could potentially be listed on it. And are they listed properly? Because, again, that liability protection is a little bit different as well. And then I just want to say thank you again for allowing me this opportunity. And I think, Diane, maybe we might have a chat or a question or something there first. And Colette, maybe you could help me with that, please.
Absolutely. So thank you, Kurt. We do have a question. And the question is a farm agritainment able to have a disclaimer for patrons to sign and agree that they, the patrons, are responsible for themselves and their families, so to be there at their own risk? So patrons cannot hold the farm responsible.
Absolutely, we love it. Those are good. And what I'm going to say to that, I'm not an attorney, okay? So I'm just going to speak to it from my understanding. Those are good, okay? It may not always be holed up in court in the event something happened, right? But we do like for that to be included as well. Always encouraged to use something like that for that case. But again, I don't want to substitute that for you having the proper liability limits to protect you in the event that doesn't go in your favor. Good question. Thank you for that one.
Thanks, Kurt. We have a second question, and this is, how do I find liability, for instance, trip and fall, insurance coverage for a farmer's market? We have an umbrella for our personal policies, but it will not cover farm at market sales.
You would want to visit with your insurance person. If they're not able to help you, you need to seek out other options, I guess, for you in that regard. And I'm not here to plug American National, but what I will say is we do recognize that, okay? And so what we do is, instead of a homeowner's policy, we put you more on either like what we define as a country estate or a farm policy, and we can get that then exposure that you have then with the farmers market. We do include that in the policy. So my point is, there is coverage out there for you. You might just have to make a decision to go in a different direction.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, Kurt. Over the years, Diane and I have done several programs on insurance, and working with you and others. And we've worked with a lot of farmers who have done a lot of due diligence. And I think Diane's going to be talking about her process of doing that. But this full disclosure that you've mentioned multiple times, that is so important. And I think that there are insurance policies out there, and then there's some decisions that you have to make about how much risk you're willing to assume, or how much protection you're willing to buy, and really look at a lot of different scenarios. I also would say that if you are at a farmer's market, it's important to understand the insurance that the farmer's market itself has. Does it have a policy, and does that policy cover its vendors? And I think that that might be variable depending upon the actual farmer's market. So another thing for you to ask your market manager or your market board about.
And Colette, can I just talk to that a little bit? So we can, just from our perspective, I'm only giving you one point of view. When we're wanting to insure a farmer's market itself, the market, we can do that. But guess what we require? We require each one of the vendors to have their own insurance and the farmer's market to be listed as additional insured on their policy. So you see how that all is interrelated with everything that you were talking about right there. I just wanted to add to that.
Yes, absolutely. And I've also heard that from retailers, and that is really coming from the insurance agency that the retailer is working with, and their insurance provider is asking their vendors to have up to $1 million and sometimes even $2 million in liability coverage. And again, it's those crossover protections, and then to be named as co-insured.
Correct.
We have another question. Does on-farm pickup of goods require different coverage than a farmer's market type setup?
I'm not going to say different coverage, but that's an exposure that is handled differently. Okay. So again, it's one of those things of full disclosure, right? The different companies would handle that differently. We have examples of harvest your own or pick your own as an example if they were doing picking. Now, if they're just picking it up there locally, we would have a code specifically for that too. So really good question there. But again, you just really need to talk with your particular insurance company and how they want to address that.
Thank you, Kurt. We don't have any other questions open right now, so thank you so much for your presentation. I think you hit on so many important topics. I definitely know I have some things to ask my agent after watching your presentation today. And so let's go ahead and have Diane share her farm perspective, and then we'll see if there's any other questions that come up for either you or Diane. And if you are watching the webinar live today, please go ahead and put your questions at any time into the Q&A box, and we'll have time to answer them after Diane's presentation. Diane, we'll turn it over to you. We can see your screen. I think you'll want to go a little bit to the left of that size bar and hit, yeah, that's the right button. Okay, great. You are in slideshow mode.
Oh, there we go. You'd think I'd have this down by now, but I'm getting better some days. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back again. And let's see if we can get her to go forward. Hello. Next, come on. Talking about umbrella policies. And I'll go over just a little bit about who we are, Greentree Naturals. I went through this yesterday, and I love this picture with the umbrellas because it's really talks about and shows us a good perspective of what liability is about, because we're all looking for an umbrella to protect ourselves from whatever comes. For us over the years, we've had so many different venues with our farm, our small farm enterprise, with the farm stand being the main one that we're doing now, but we also continue to do our on-farm workshops. This is year 25 of doing the workshops. We do a 7-week workshop series. We still do farm walks with our customers, that we open our gardens to the customers who come to our farm stand. I continue to do mentorships and consulting for sustainable land use. We do community farm tours. We've been working with the university and garden organizations for at least 25 years. And we've done a few chamber of commerce tours over the years, which is usually about 100 people coming into walking through the gardens. This particular photo is a Chamber of Commerce tour, which, as you can see, it was a rainy day and they came anyways. And rainy days bring a whole different kind of liability that we are looking at. We do on-farm research and educational field days and farm-to-table events. So we've done a little bit of everything. And over the course of time, a lot of it has been very much about looking at how we are protecting ourselves. And I showed this picture yesterday, and I think it's the perfect concept when we're thinking about liability of a cat sleeping on a beware of dog house. One of the things for us as farmers is we really do need to be aware of the areas of risk associated with marketing and production, employment, insurance, and consider all the legal issues associated with everything that we do on the farm. As farmers, we really need to take the time to educate ourselves, and that's exactly what you guys are doing. And I'm grateful that you've signed up for this workshop series, because I think it will provide you with a lot of information that will help you to minimize the risks of doing business. And farming is a risky business, absolutely. You know, if you have the public coming to your farm for a UPIC or CSA customers coming to the farm, you're looking at liability, and it's really up to us to protect ourselves, because as you know, it's always something. There's always something happening on the farm, and we have had we've seen times where the neighbors' cows get out. We've had cows show up in our neighborhood, and fortunately our garden was fenced, so that was okay. But if it's not a situation where the cows get on the road and you hit the cow, you might be liable for that. We've had a situation where somebody pulled up with their brand new car, and one of our dogs jumped up on the car and scratched the side of the car, and we would technically be liable for that. But fortunately, the people didn't pursue that. I've also heard of a situation where some people were doing a farm tour, and one of their kids got excited because some other kids came and they let the goats out, and the goats came running over and they got sidetracked. Next thing you know, the goats, which goats have a way of doing this, are jumping up on people's cars and playing around. And that was a whole new realm of excitement for considering, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then at the farmer's market, I had one of my neighbor vendors who was selling spinach as ready to eat, and one of his customers bit into a rock and lost a crown. And it was the customer came back to the vendor and said, "Hey, you said this was ready to eat, and I broke my tooth and it cost me $500. I'm not sure what they worked out to make that an adjustment for that, but I don't think there was a lawsuit or anything. But the fact is, you have to be aware of what your liability is, and it's up to us to protect ourselves, and it's up to us to make an effort to do what we can to protect ourselves. So for us, we have with our a number of different things that we have when we have farm tours and people coming, when we have the schools coming for the pumpkin project, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We put out red and orange flagging for where all the kids are walking, just to make sure they're walking on the paths and staying out of the more hazardous areas. We will do what we can to clearly identify any of the hazards. And a part of that is to go along with talking to them about what those hazards are before anybody comes into the garden. I will always let them know, which seems obvious to me when you come to a garden, that the ground's uneven, there's hoses laying around, but we try to make sure that we put anything that might be hazardous out of the way. We do have a set of farm rules on our homepage of our website at greentreenaturals.com that kind of outlines things like, please leave your dogs at home, wear reasonable shoes when you're walking around, when you come to the garden or when you come to the farm for a visit. Although reasonable shoes is not so reasonable for some people. We've had people show up with short high heels thinking that was more reasonable than high heels, which wasn't so conducive to walking around the garden. So you have to be clear with what you're saying. And really, if you have the public invited to your property, you need to make an effort to look at what the risks are and know that accidents happen, and it's up to us to be well informed to protect ourselves. So one of the things that we do, I've had, I don't know how many people have said, boy, you've got a lot of signs around the farm. And yes, we do. And after going through this program, we did a liability type program, and Kurt was with us. I'm not sure what year that was. It's been quite a few years ago that we did that. But after doing that, I changed a lot of things that we do here on the farm because we have so many people coming through. And in recent years, we had a gentleman that was bringing his honeybees here, which was a wonderful opportunity for us to have fresh honey here on the farm. And it was kind of set off out of the garden, back a ways from the farm stand. But to be careful, I put up this sign, and I put up a couple of sawhorses and flagging, and blocked off the area completely, and had not only this sign, but 2 other signs. And one day at my farm stand, I just thankfully looked up as a father and his 2 sons were climbing over those signs, heading out to look at the bees. And I quickly ran out and yelled at them and stopped them. And their response was, well, we have a beehive. We know all about bees. Well, I explained to them that 1 hive is very different than 24 hives. So they're looking at 750,000 plus bees that are not going to be happy to have a stranger walking around. And they got angry at me when I made them come back. But because I had my signs out and had clearly marked everything off, I probably, most likely, would have been protected with liability. But I did my due diligence to offer that information. You always wonder why everywhere you go in stores, they always have these slippery when wet signs, when it's obvious that it's slippery when wet, but the signs are there for that reason. We had another encounter some years ago. We had a farm tour happening on a Sunday afternoon, and the day before, we had a bear come in and get into our chicken coop and after our goats. So we lost a bunch of chickens, and in the meantime, we put up an electric fence, and we had this big bright yellow sign on the fence. And what I learned was having a sign that says warning electric fence is not enough, because a woman reached right over the sign. I watched her do it, reached over the sign to pet one of the goats, and her underwire bra arced on the electric fence. She went flying backwards and hit the ground, just missing a rock wall. I mean, it was a potential horrible situation, which thankfully no one was hurt. But what we learned was you turn the electric fence off when people come around, because even after that incident, somebody else went over and licked their finger and touched the fence to see how hot it was. And it was hot. The purpose of the fence was to keep a bear away. So due diligence means putting up signs, but it also means being aware that people don't read signs. But I did my due diligence. Now, when we have the university come to our farm, and we do a lot of university programs, they always put up this sign, warning, under Idaho law, there are risks associated with agritourism, which could lead to injury or death. You're assuming these risks. I mean, it drives me crazy to put this sign up, but the point is very clearly made. And with that, we end up putting up more signs. And the thing is, when we have groups come to our farm, for me to do due diligence, along with having my signs, before anybody comes into the garden, I will stand at the garden gate and I will go over the sign of what just basically says the ground is uneven, there's tripping hazards. Please pay attention to where you're walking. What happens oftentimes is people are looking where they're not walking, and things can happen. So I will gather them together, draw their attention to the sign before they go in, and point out the hazards and eliminate as many hazards as I can before they come into the garden. And then we move forward with that. All of these caution signs are about what you need to protect yourself and your farm from liability if something happened. When an accident occurs, the insurance company does follow up. For example, when our dog some years ago was a young pup and I was watering plants, not paying attention where I was looking, he started running around and he hit me and knocked me down and tore my meniscus in my knee, which resulted in surgery. When I went into the emergency room, they fill out a form that said, for the insurance form, and ask what happened. I said, well, my dog ran, or a dog ran into me. I fell down, I injured myself. The follow-up with my insurance company was like weeks later, whose dog was it and whose land were you on? And that's where those hold harmless agreements, and Kurt would probably have more on that, but that's where the hold harmless agreements, you know, I know that if you signed one and you came to my farm, that gives a certain sense of security for me, that I know you would not sue me. But it's not you that would do that. It would be the insurance company that looks at that and goes, I mean, if it turned into a lawsuit, the insurance company does look at, they really would rather have the other insurance pay for it. And that's kind of what I see happening with that. And that's my interpretation of that only. So it's happened to me a couple times, and a couple times I've had that follow-up. So it's important that you think about those possibilities, and just, you know, insurance, as much as I don't like paying as much as we do for our protection, it gives me peace of mind. And I still do all the due diligence with that, because I love having the kids come to the farm. I love having these events, and with agritourism, there's so many different things that are happening more and more, because people love to be connected to their farmers. They love to come to the farm. They love to see the farm. First farm event we had where a school bus came, the school bus got stuck, and it was the school bus driver's fault, but also my fault that I wasn't more clear about the fact that they had soft ground and they had to be careful. And when it just always goes back to the due diligence. And really, when it comes down to it, before you host any kind of event associated with agritourism, take the time to have a conversation with your insurance agent. And ideally, you want to be working with an insurance company that is familiar with farms, because there's a lot of things, a lot of situations that happen on our farms that don't happen anywhere else. I mean, before we, and I'm not plugging American National, but before we had American National, we were not with an insurance company that knew much about farms, and we were glad to find someone that could understand our specific situation. So we've had special events on the farm. We had Sunday brunch on the farm for 3 years. We had a Sunday afternoon high tea for 3 years as well. And we even hosted an organic wine tasting for a few years, which was one of our restaurants had the liquor license, and the restaurant covered all aspects of it. But let me tell you, having 35 people tasting wine and coming through for a walk through the gardens was a little unnerving. Everybody had a good time, and we don't do any of these things anymore. This was years ago, but we were really learning a lot about what our liability was, and really testing the limits to that. I mean, we had a lot of fun with those events, and not to say that we might not do some again, but probably no more organic wine tastings. The Pumpkin Project, when we do this with the school, and if you want to learn more about that, it's on our website at greentreenaturals.com. The school gets permission slips for all the kids, and we require that there's one parent for every 3 children. So we have plenty of supervision with the kids, and you can kind of see some orange flagging back there in the back with these kids. But we've been doing the Pumpkin Project for 25 years, and it's just a wonderful thing to have the children here, and the school benefits, the kids benefit, the parents benefit. And as far as the marketing aspect, all those parents that come to the farm end up coming to my farm stand because the kids love it, and it's really a win-win situation. But any program that's associated with the school is typically covered by the school's insurance for the first layer, and then we have our own insurance to protect that. We've had our mentorship program for since 1997, and when we first started having interns on the farm in the early years, so 30 years ago, things have changed a lot. And when we first started doing that, we just did our program for 3 days a week. And our internship program has always really been focused on the educational piece. So we were investing a lot of time teaching. We never had interns just for labor. And I've never really quite understood that aspect. Granted, yes, they were doing laborious activities on the farm, but it was truly an educational endeavor. And as we've grown over the years and learned more about the rules and regulations associated with interns and apprentices, we now, as of 5 or 6 years ago, we charge for our mentorship program. And in doing so, it shifts the liability because the students that come here are actually coming here to learn, and they're coming here for a true educational program. And that's worked out better for us. We'd rather do that because we invest so much time teaching. And if you've had an intern or employees, apprentice students, whatever, that when you go to teach something, it takes you twice as long to do whatever you're doing. So now we charge, and that has been a better situation for us. So a little bit just hands-on experience on the farm is often called an internship or apprenticeship. But if you provide room and board or stipend, the intern is considered an employee, even though you're not paying the minimum wage. And I'm sure when our labor representative talks after me, she'll be offering a more clear perspective. This is my understanding of it, and things may have changed since I gathered this information some years ago. But if your intern isn't receiving room and board or a stipend, and the arrangement is less formal, or they may receive just a few bags of vegetables for the season, they may be considered volunteers. And then if individuals pay you to be educated on your farm, you are considered a school, which is a business enterprise, and your commercial liability insurance, and not the Department of Labor, cover the students at your farm school. So that is where we're at with what we do. And then I think I'm not going to spend much on this because the Department of Labor is going to be talking and offering clear guidelines of how you define the difference between an employee versus a volunteer versus an intern or apprentice or student. So I'll let her do that. And hopefully she will cover this as far as what you can pay casual labor before needing to provide them with a 1099. So I'm moving through this fast. So selling specific products is another thing that we really need to think about for liability. And the food processing laws may limit what we can sell and who to. And they really, the health department really does set the minimum guidelines for the steps that you need to prepare to sell certain foods, whether you require a specific license or have to be in a commercial kitchen, or how you go about that process. So it's really a good idea to become familiar with regulations and guidelines when it comes to selling processed foods in Idaho or any state. But we will be having a presentation specifically about that in one of the other sessions coming up, and the Idaho Cottage Food Act fact sheet will be a good resource for you with that. Oh, look, I moved right through that. So this is my last slide, and I just open it up for any questions. I went through everything pretty quickly, but I think Kurt mentioned some of these things. These are really important to have a conversation with your insurance person, and just be clear with what you have going on so you're protected. I mean, we talked about how farmers markets typically will have an insurance. I say typically because all farmers markets have their own rules and regulations that they go by, and their own governing factors as far as what they require for insurance and or liability. And finding out, I mean, I talk to people a lot of times that are just starting out with a market garden, or just starting at the farmer's market or something, or having some events on their farm. And they would say, oh, my homeowner's policy covers it. Well, it may or it may not. I mean, obviously I'm a farmer. I'm not selling insurance by any means, but it's really important that we accept responsibility for what we're doing. And in doing so, we do our due diligence, and we protect ourselves, because nobody else is going to do that. So these questions would be good ones for you to ask. And I actually have a conversation with our insurance person every single year, because our farm activities change, and we have made 2 claims to our insurance company over the years, and both of them, we made them. One was a bear got in and ripped down our fence, and they actually covered to a contractor to come and repair our fence because we didn't have time. And another time we filed a claim when our commercial refrigerator died, and we lost all the produce and sales that were in it, and they actually reimbursed us for the cost of the losses. So we were really grateful that we had that coverage. So I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Diane. We have 2 questions that have come in, and the first one is there insurance I might or should have as a volunteer on a farm?
Say that again.
Is there insurance I might or should have as a volunteer on the farm? So this person is volunteering on a farm and is wondering if there's a certain insurance they should have as the volunteer.
Oh, right. Well, ideally, you certainly want to have health insurance that would cover if you slipped and broke your ankle, which that did happen to me on my farm. And when the insurance company followed up, they wanted to know where I was when I broke my ankle. So I would say yes, but I think that's just personal health insurance. I don't know if there's a liability insurance that you would get for volunteering like that, but that's something that Kurt or your insurance agent would have an answer for.
Yeah, I'll just step in. I wouldn't see as a volunteer, right? That really wouldn't fall on you. It would be more of who are you volunteering for, right? That's the person who would need it. So I would say, and I can't speak for everybody, but I would say you would not need it if you're the volunteer.
Thanks. And
so if a volunteer is coming to the farm, then the farm needs to be covering that volunteer. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And I think we'll learn a little bit more about that in our next hour, volunteers on the farm. Okay, the next question that we have for you, Diane, is what about the Idaho agritourism statute? Doesn't that protect you?
Doesn't that protect me? I assume nothing. And I would rather be overzealous with my farm policy and then assume anything. So that's my answer to that. I don't really know for myself. I don't assume that, and I try to have a policy that makes me feel secure with what we're doing. So there's it's always something. Things happen and we want to protect ourselves. So that's all I can say is
Yeah.
due diligence.
I would agree with due diligence. And I think there's so many details that bear on where liability and responsibility lands that I would not say that the Idaho agritourism statute is going to protect you. It might provide some level of protection. However, if there was some type of dangerous situation, that might be excluded. And so I think definitely you'll want to look up and read the statute and also talk to your insurance provider. Next question, and I think our last question before we switch topics, is how do you determine the cost of insurance coverage included in your products? Is there a percentage you use to add to the cost? So I think this is on looking at the price that you are charging for your products, and is there a percentage that you consider of that price to be your insurance costs?
I haven't really come up with any actual percentage. I just feel that I want to always get as much as I possibly can for what I'm selling, and we have always been the most expensive at the farmers market. And part of that is because of that. I don't really have a formula for that. I just try to get as much as I possibly can for what we sell, and I hope all of you will do the same, because we're not competing with the grocery store, the food service industry. We're providing a product that should be fair wage and fair label for us. So thank you for the opportunity to share. You can always follow up with an email to me. I'm happy to talk some more.
Great. Thank you so much, Kurt and Diane. We really appreciate your sharing about understanding insurance and liability on today's webinar. And again, for those of you that are participating live, we will have a copy of the slides available on the Cultivating Success website. We are going to just take a couple-minute break as we transfer to our next presenter. And so I just want to give you an opportunity to stand up and stretch. We're going to take 2 minutes and then we will move on to our next topic. So welcome, Carmen and Catherine. We really appreciate your being here today to talk about farm labor. I'll just give folks about 1 more minute before we move on to the next piece of our program today. It's always nice to be able to get up and move around when you have 2 hours on Zoom. Our next topic for today's webinar is farm labor, talking about hiring employees, interns, and volunteers. And labor is, I think, a question that we often receive an extension is, what are the rules around labor? And we really appreciate that we have 2 people talking about labor today on the farm. Carmen Sacero is a wage and hour investigator with the U.S. Department of Labor, and she's going to be talking about the rules and regulations around labor, looking at what is an employee, what's an intern, what's a volunteer, and what do you need to know as a farmer who is looking to have employees, interns, and or volunteers on your farm. And then Catherine Creswell with Moose Meadow Farm in Clark Fork, Idaho, is going to share their farm's experiencing hiring employees on their farm. So we're going to start with Carmen, and she's going to share her screen and her presentation. Again, these slides will be available to you from the Cultivating Success website. So Carmen, if you would like to share your screen, and during the presentation, if anyone has questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, either anonymously or with your name. So thank you again. And I can see your slides, Carmen. I just need to be clicked into slideshow mode.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, and you can hear me just fine?
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Yeah, I had a technical difficulty with my headphones. They didn't want to work anymore, so switching the audio a little bit. So Carmen Salcedo, I'm with the Wage and Hour Division. I'm located here in Boise, Idaho. And I'm just going to talk to you all a little bit of Diana brought a little bit about like volunteers, interns, what type of labor can you have in a farm, okay? So just a little disclaimer that the PowerPoint doesn't have any legal stand, that for any legality of this document, you still have to refer to the federal code of regulations or the Federal Register. So a few of the workers that we find in farms would be our migrant seasonal workers. So seasonal are going to be your local workers that live in the area, that can go home at the end of the day and work at a farm. Your migrant workers are those workers that cannot go home at the end of the day. So they live in a like further distance, or they're coming from other states to work on the farm, or they're coming from other countries to work on the farm. We also have what we consider farm labor contractors. This is kind of like your staffing agencies, but for the agriculture world. So you contract someone to bring labor to your farm. When you have this type of workers, farm labor worker, labor contractors, you have your migrant or your seasonal workers. There's two laws that apply to this type of workers. There's the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is your normal minimum wage, overtime, child labor, and record keeping requirements, as well as the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. This one regulates the farm work disclosures, what you told those employees they were going to be paid, the working conditions that they were going to be doing, their duties, those type of things, as well as record keeping requirements when you hire a farm labor contractor. They have to give you certain documents to let you know who's working on your farm, what they're performing in your farm, what their pay is, so that you can also keep another tab to make sure that they're in compliance with the regulations, since potentially you can be joint liable for those employees. The other workforce that we see, and it's increasing a lot in Idaho, is the H-2A program. So basically you bring workers from other countries because you cannot find local workers. So you're bringing them either from Mexico, South Africa, different places in the country, depending on what type of agriculture you're doing, to come help on your farm. And that would be your H-2A program. Okay, so volunteers. For us volunteers under the federal regulation, you have to be a nonprofit organization in order to have what it's classified as volunteers. And we'll talk about interns, how they might overlap a little bit with volunteers. And interns, obviously, you do not have to be a nonprofit. But for volunteers, usually we see this in religious establishments and charity causes where they're volunteering for certain things at their school, when they're volunteering for a certain period of time, students volunteering at school. So that's also how you can use volunteers if you're classified as a school or have like a kind of like a teaching program. The things with volunteers, you have to make sure that they're not doing the for-profit activities for the business. So you're either having them do certain things like a special event, but not necessarily like you're going to have someone that's going to volunteer to be your secretary. So those type of things, or you're someone to volunteer to be your salesperson because you need to sell your crops. So just a distinction between that. And also make sure that your volunteers are not displacing actual employees. Or if you have an employee that's an office personnel, that she's not volunteering the same type of duties for a special event. For that, she does need to be paid. Or if you have someone in the farm, working in the farm, and that's what they do, they cannot volunteer their time for activities that they already do, and they get compensated for. Otherwise, we consider them as being employees. And when we look at employees, obviously the Fair Labor Standards Act applies to them. So they have to receive minimum wage. They have to be paid overtime if applicable. Agriculture in some instances is exempt from overtime. We look at the child labor. It is a little bit different for agriculture activities versus non-agriculture, and the record keeping. So interns, we look at what we call the primary beneficiary test or economics test. For this, we look at if there is no expectation that they're going to be paid for the internship program that they're doing. There has to be an educational component to it. So the activities have to be some kind of, that person has to be receiving some kind of education out of the program. And the internship is tied to the interns formal educational program. Also that it corresponds to the academic calendar, and it's limited to the period of learning. So if the intern is still going to school, then obviously they can still be an intern. If the intern graduates, then at that point, it's depending if there's any continuing of any further training, then that intern will not be classified as an intern anymore. Also that the intern is not displacing any employees, so that you're not hiring interns to not hire employees. And that there is no agreement already in place that you're going to be hired after your internship program. Just to prevent that, employers might sometimes say, okay, I'm going to hire you, but I'm going to put you as an intern as a probationary period. Well, not necessarily, because you're already hiring that person. So at that point, you already have that employee-employer relationship. So there has to be no agreement that there's going to be a job guarantee to them at the end of the internship program. So apprentices, there is a program of apprenticeship under the Department of Labor. Unfortunately, I don't enforce that program, so that's why you don't see a lot of information about it in my slides. But our Office of Apprenticeship is the one that enforces any apprentices. So here's their contact information. You can reach it in our website. They do have some apprentice programs for agriculture. And so it will be a good idea to reach out to them to see what apprentice programs they have available for you and for your farm activities. So a few things that you as a farmer can take credit for towards wages of the employees is what we consider the 3M credit. This is under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it's under the minimum wage, overtime, child labor, and record keeping. And it's an exemption for not paying the minimum wage, okay? So in certain circumstances, the farmer can take credit for lodging. So any housing that you provide to these employees, for meals, and other custom practices depending on the type of industry. So there's a few criteria that you have to meet in order to get this 3M credit. So there are a few requirements. Some of them is that the lodging, if you're taking credit for the lodging, has to be for something that's regularly given in the type of industry, or you as an employer have been regularly providing housing for your workers. In agriculture, I can tell you that that's a common practice. that a lot of farmers do give housing to either seasonal or migrant workers. If you do have H-2A and migrant and seasonal workers, just note that H-2A, you do have to provide free housing. So if you have any corresponding workers, you have to provide them the same terms and conditions that you do as H-2A. So you might not be able to take this 3M credit for those corresponding employment. But if you're in that situation, you can send me an email, we can chat about it, just so that you're still in compliance with the H-2A program, because sometimes the laws kind of talk to each other. So just to make sure that by being okay on one, that you're still okay on the other act. The other thing is your employee has to voluntarily accept the agreement, so that you're going to take part of their wages are going to be constituted to the lodging that you're going to be providing to those employees. So that employee cannot be coerced on taking the housing, and it has to be to the primary benefit of the employee. So if it's a benefit to you as an employer to have the employee there because they can be on call, they can answer any calls while you're away from the farm, then obviously at that point it's more of a benefit to you than to the employee. You also have to make sure that you're in compliance with state, federal and local laws regarding the housing. So if your state has regulation depending of the safety of the housing, then you have to make sure that you're meeting those qualifications. Otherwise, the credit that you're taking for the housing becomes invalid. So you cannot have a house that's condemned if your state requires any pre-occupancy inspections for any farm workers, then you have to take those in order for you to use the housing. Other things, some states might have like a limit of occupancy, so make sure you're still in compliance with those regulations in order to still qualify to take credit for the lodging or for the housing that you're providing to that employee. And on top of that, you're supposed to keep records of how much does it cost you to run that property, to make sure that it corresponds with the credit that you're taking from that employee's wages. So if it takes you paying taxes and paying utilities, if the employer is the one paying the utilities, trash, any mortgage, any type of expense that you have towards that property, you can then convert and take into account to take that credit. So if all of that is, let's say, $1,000 a month, then you can charge that employee or take a credit of $1,000 in wages. But you cannot ask that employee to pay you $1,500 if it only costs you $1,000. So you cannot profit from the employee. So here as it goes a little bit into more further detail of what I was talking about, that it has to be something that's regularly given to those employees or is typical in the type of industry. Like I said, agriculture is typical that they provide housing. The other lodging is also like hotels, motels. That's also sometimes typical that for the managers that they have live-in managers, so they can potentially take credit for part of their wages for the housing that they're being provided for. So we talk about that the housing has to be adequate, and it has to meet all of the state, local regulations. The records that must be kept. Obviously, the records regarding the costs and the records of the credit that you're taking, and make sure that you communicate that to the worker that, okay, I'm going to pay you, let's say, this is just an example, that I'm going to pay you $15 an hour, and it's going to be to the equivalent of like $3,000 a month. This is just random example. And your housing is going to be $1,000. So you're going to be paid $2,000 plus the other $1,000 is going to be the credit for the housing. So you just need to keep those records and disclose that to the worker. So here it just goes a little bit into the difference between reasonable cost and fair value. So you can note here that it says whichever is less. Usually your cost for the property is gonna be less. It's very rare occasions where the fair value is gonna be the one that's less. So if the way we look at fair value is we look at common houses around the area, kind of like if you're getting ready to sell your house, similar comps that are in the area. It's kind of the same concept that we look at for the fair value. As for the reasonable cost is we look at the expenses that you as a farmer have for that property. Like I said, everything that it's costing you money for that property, you can include into the credit. But as long as you're not making a profit out of taking that credit. Okay. This just goes a little bit into, let's say that to the quantity of employees that you have at a specific housing. So if the housing costs you $1,000 a month to maintain, then if you have one employee, you can take credit of $1,000 for that employee. But if you have 2 employees that are living in that housing, then you can only take $500 credit from each employee. So the more employees that you have living in that housing, the less credit you can take per employee, if that makes any sense. And that sometimes employers don't take that into account, that if you have more employees there, then it's less credit that you can take per employee versus if you only had 1 employee living there. Okay. Once again, this just goes into the math part of it, of how to calculate the amount of money that you're being that you can credit towards the employee. The examples I was giving you is kind of like on a monthly basis, just so it's better to understand, because, oh, well, you pay rent on a monthly basis, right? But the way the regulations actually look at it, it's on a per week basis. So you would have to calculate a per week basis just to make sure that this employee is actually still making minimum wage with the credit that you're taking out, and how much credit you can take each week. So that way you know how many hours they can work, or kind of explain those disclosures to that employee once you present the credit for the housing that you plan on taking. So it's just simple math. You take your monthly expenses that you have for the property, you multiply them by 12 and then divide them by 52, because there's 52 weeks in the year. And that way you can take your amount of how much can you take out of that, how much credit you can take for that week for that employee. Okay. This goes just into our enforcement policies. We enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act. We enforce also, like I mentioned before, the Migrant and Seasonal Agriculture Worker Protection Act. We also enforce field sanitation here in Idaho. We enforce the H-2A program. Those are kind of the acts that fall for agriculture world. We also enforce other acts, and potentially if you're dealing with H-2B, like if you have a packing house that's not ag exempt, you might be dealing and bringing workers from other countries, you might be dealing with H-2B. We also enforce that. So when we, if we find violations, we do tell employers how to correct it going forward. And if there is any back wages due, we do present those to the employer as well. Usually your statutes of limitations are 2 years, so meaning we go back 2 years. If the violations are willful, then we go back 3 years. Here's just a few information on what our civil money penalties look like if we find certain violations, what are max civil money penalties. So when we find violations, when we go out and do our compliance reviews, we do sometimes what's called civil money penalties. So this is what this numbers could be. Obviously, these are like the max, the worst case scenario. So, but for any like minimum wage overtime violation, and then we're looking at a max of $2,374. As well as like I mentioned before, we enforce child labor regulations. So what activities they can perform at the farm, which activities they're prohibited, and also what hours can they work if they're a little bit younger. So that our max civil money penalty can be up to $15,138. All of these numbers are public information. They're in our website. Each year they go up a little bit. So the new numbers get published each year. So here's just additional information on how to contact our offices, all the information that we have on our websites regarding any of the acts that I talked about today, same of the regulations that we have, and how to contact any of the wage and hour offices.
Carmen, thank you for that really comprehensive presentation. We do have a question that came in, and it's specifically on how do the Fair Wage Labor Act and other laws pertain to hiring family members to work on the farm. And so I think, you know, in many farm situations, the farm's owned by a family members work on the farm in an unpaid situation. And then sometimes they are actually paid as employees. So how does that law work, kind of going from unpaid to paid?
Right. So the Fair Labor Standards does have an exemption for immediate family members. I would have to get you a little bit more information because the Seasonal Migrant and Protection Work Act also has, just for simplicity, we call it FLSA for the Fair Labor Standards Act and MESPA for the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. But both of those laws have immediate family exemptions, meaning the applications of minimum wage, overtime, child labor, and record keeping potentially don't apply to the farm or to that individual, to that immediate family member. And then MESPA has the same protection, but under MESPA, they have to be engaged in any what we consider fresh tea activities. So they have to be engaged in like potentially hiring, helping with recruiting, among other activities that are conducted in the farm. But I can send you a little bit more information on that and what each act considers immediate family member to be. Because obviously there is a limit of how, if you're like a brother, if you're a son or a father, versus if you're like a cousin or like distant uncle, obviously the law is not going to extend that far. But yeah, there's an exception from that so that the regulations don't apply, meaning that you don't have to be paid because the Fair Labor Standards Act or the MESPA does not apply to you.
Okay, great, thank you. So just to recap, so I'm understanding that I'm conveying the right information. What I understood you to say is that for-profit companies are not allowed to have volunteers, that classification just doesn't exist for a for-profit company, but it does for a nonprofit.
Correct. Correct. However, the internship program does exist for profit. So sometimes a lot of people might call them volunteers, but it's actually an internship program.
I see. And then the internship program needs to be educationally based.
Correct.
And it needs to have a clear, pretty much curriculum basis, as I understood the slides. And within that the maximum benefit is around the intern's education, not as labor replacement. for the
Correct.
farm. So not replacing paid labor. It's truly an educational program.
Correct.
And then one other question I know that comes up a lot working with farms is, how does Department of Labor consider things like, let's say you do have somebody on your farm and they might be an employee, but you pay them, you also give them a weekly share of produce that has a certain value.
Mhm.
Is that something that you need to report somewhere or track, or anything that the employee needs to report? Is that essentially considered income?
I cannot answer whether it's considered income for IRS purposes because that's a different agency. But for us, we can give credit to the farmer towards wages. So whatever the fair cost, the fair value of those crops were, not the price that you're going to go and sell at the farmer's market, but the fair cost. How much did it cost you to do that crop, or for that bag? Is it $10, $50? Is that the fair value that you as a farmer put into that crop? And you can deduct that from the wages from your worker, and that's okay, as long as you're not profiting from your employees by taking a credit for that bag.
I see that. So that's really the cost of production. When
Correct.
you're talking about that fair value versus a
Correct.
market value.
Correct.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing today, presenting. We'll make sure that everybody receives a copy of the slides that you prepared, and we really appreciate your taking time to be on our webinar today. You're welcome to stay on if any other questions come up. But thank
Okay.
you
Yeah,
for your time.
I'll stay on. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Well, our next presenter is Catherine Creswell with Moose Meadow Farm. Catherine, thanks for joining us today and
Oh, you
talk
bet.
about employees on your farm. So can go ahead and take it away and share your screen.
Okay. It's putting me through the ringer here to share my screen. Can you see it or not?
I cannot see it yet. Mackenzie, are you able to see it?
I do not.
Well, let's try again. I click share screen and I'm not getting it. Sorry, let me try again.
That is okay. After you click share screen and pick the window you want, there is just that last little blue button that says share. That should.
Right, I'm really sorry. It's taking me to system preferences. Open system preferences and select security and privacy to grant access. Let me try that.
Okay. I can also share your slides for you, and you can just tell me when you want to advance if that's easier.
Why don't you do that? I'm sorry for the trouble.
No problem. Here we go.
Great, thanks. All right. So I'm Catherine, and my husband and I run slide, and I'll give you some details. We are 1 acre in vegetable production. 60% of our sales go to grocery stores and restaurants, and 40% of our sales go through a CSA and our winter online store. We hire every year for our busy season, April through October. We aim for 3 full-time equivalent positions plus Spencer and myself. Full-time is 40 hours a week. And so for us, that's 2.5 full-time equivalents on the farm each week, and a half-time delivery driver. So that we have 4 employees equaling 3 full-time equivalents. We produce year-round, which means we have continuous employment available that goes down to part-time in the winter, it's much less than 40 hours a week. We pay a lot for labor. It's 50% of our total expenses as a business. I think that's fairly common. As for wages, we pay 17 or 18 an hour, depending on experience, plus produce and educational benefits on top of that. And then Spencer and myself pay ourselves as employee of the business. We have the business set up as an LLC S Corp that allows us to do that. Next slide. So things that we have been doing well with employment, and we hired our first worker in 2018. So we're fairly new at this, but things that we've done well include we keep a predictable work schedule. So our workers show up each day and there's a general pattern to the week and to the work that they do, so they know what to expect. We ask almost no overtime of anybody. We respect their lives outside of work, and occasionally something happens, most likely on a harvest day, like we have to wash the greens 6 times instead of 3 times because of insects or dirt or whatever. And then everyone has to stay a little bit late. We offer many tangible benefits plus learning opportunities, all of that on top of a wage. We hold clear expectations of what each worker is supposed to do, and we provide the tools that help them succeed. We also take workers' input regularly, both formally and informally, so that we're hearing what their needs are and how we can help them do their jobs better. We have offered paid time off and clothing and gear stipends every year until this year. We've run into trouble with people taking paid time off and then asking for unpaid time off on top of that, kind of surprising us with those requests. And basically paid time off in our busy season is just too much for us right now. So we're not offering that again, although we have offered it every other year. And then a clothing and gear stipend we do offer to employees who have completed 12 months of employment with us. And unfortunately, we haven't had an employee stay more than 12 months with us. So it hasn't, nobody has cashed in on that yet. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We also keep a tidy farm with a solid routine. So workers, they show up and it's clear, they can clearly see what the work is, and they're not distracted by a bunch of junk or, surprise projects. Typically, we warn them what's coming up, and they show up, they do that job, and then they go home feeling satisfied. So like I said, these are things that we've done well, but we don't do everything well. You can go to the next slide. Things that we have struggled with as employers. Again, I'm sure this is not unique to us, but it could be particular to a farm business. Employee retention is, we haven't nailed it yet. We have a lot of challenges in where we live. It's a very rural area and housing is basically unavailable. And so workers are commuting mostly from Sandpoint, which is a 40-minute drive, depending on where in the town they live. And that gets old for a lot of workers over time. So we understand, they come, they work for our busy season, and then they leave usually. We struggle with offering time off, like I mentioned earlier. We hire employees so that my husband and I can have a peaceable work-life balance. We have 2 young children. And we want employees to come relieve our workload a little bit so we can keep running our farm the way we want to do it. When workers ask us for time off, that puts an undue burden on us. And it's just not something we can handle basically in our busy season. So we'll honor, obviously things come up in employees' lives and we honor time off requests as we need to, but we no longer offer paid time off, and we just ask that they can give us as much time and notice in advance as possible. Another thing we struggle with is harvest consistency. even us as owners, we struggle with making kale bunches the exact same every time. And so passing that on, trying to pass that on to workers is challenging. We've come up with a few ways to do that, but basically when you're charging $3.75 for a bunch of kale or a bunch of carrots, you want it to be the same size, the same amount of food for that price every single week, no matter who's harvesting, and that's challenging. We also struggle with our workers maintaining focus, ownership of their tasks, and engagement. We understand that workers come to work for us because they're interested in the job, or they need a wage, any number of things, but they're not always invested in the job as we are. We understand that. But when it starts to affect the quality of the product they're sending out the door, or the efficiency of their work, that is frustrating to us. And we don't always know how to get everyone back on the same page and engaged and focused. So like I said, we hire employees so that Spencer and I can have a meaningful work-life balance, one that works well for us. There are lots of things that are repetitive and need to get done week by week that are great tasks for employees. We'd like then to have time for Spencer and I to work on the business. Things like improving our website, or changing our marketing scheme, or bigger projects like building a walk-in cooler. And what we've struggled with is not having as much of that autonomy as we want, because we're doing more hand-holding or training or monitoring of the workers, just to make sure that the products going out each week are top quality. We also struggle with workers who ask us for more pay and benefits. It's just kind of as a gut punch when we are paying them as much as we possibly can. The workers are actually making a higher hourly wage than Spencer and I, typically, and they come to us and ask for more pay or extra benefits like paid time off. And we're always like, okay, are they going to leave if we say no? Because we don't want them to leave. Or can we have a negotiation with them and see if they actually think that they're doing more beneficial work to us? It's always a tough conversation, and sometimes we do up pay and then they quit a couple weeks later anyway. That's challenging. Housing, I mentioned before, is extremely challenging. Workers can't find a place to live near us, but we've done something to address that. And then it's a really tough job market right now, so it's kind of an interesting time to be an employer. But we have struggled the past 2 years just to fill our 3 full-time equivalent positions. I think last year we needed to hire our 2.5 field positions, and we went through 9 people just for those 2.5 positions in the span of 8 months. So that means, one, that we've gotten really good at training and kind of making our farm user-friendly. But it just gets old. It gets pretty stressful to always have to be looking to hire and then training new people. This year's looking better. We have a crew, but we'll see how long it lasts. Another thing we struggle with is we would love to offer health plans, 401k, health savings account, parental leave. Those are things that we value as humans and as employers. But when we've looked into it, we are just too small. The economics won't work out for us. They're not in our favor. So we feel bad. We feel like it would be a better job offer if we could offer something like that to our employees. We feel like they might stay longer, but the economics just don't work out. And we so far have not been able to do that. So next slide. Kind of how we manage employees. Once people are hired, there's no end date. So we generally don't say, come work for our summer season. We just say, come work for us. And we would like them to stay through the busy season, April through October or November. But we also hire 2 people in the winter for part-time work. So we would love people to just stay and keep working. I think our longest employee was here with us for 14 months, and that was fantastic. But eventually she moved on as well. And So once hired, there's no end date, just hasn't, it hasn't really panned out for us so far. We are implementing a bonus system this season. So our crew is starting full-time in April, and they're working at either $16 or $17 an hour. They know this up front. If they make it through our busy season, through to the end of November, with fewer than 4 days off and fewer than 3 mistakes out the door, like someone was undercharged or overcharged, or the order was packed wrong, something like that. Fewer than 3 mistakes out the door as a team, then everybody gets $1 an hour bonus at the end of the season. So that's a pretty big carrot to dangle at the end of the stick, and we're hoping it is worthwhile for people to stay on through our busy season with that arrangement. We have an employee handbook that everyone gets, and on the first day of work, they get an orientation, like a tour of the farm. We kind of deploy our ethos, set the tone. We do morning meetings every day. Sometimes they're 10 minutes, sometimes they're 3 minutes, but we kind of let everyone know what's going on during the day. We have a whiteboard that's kind of the motherboard of the business, where we write our activities. Workers can write suggestions they have or problems they have. It's just a way of communicating. Each employee of ours, including Spencer and I, has an area of tidiness on the farm that's they're in charge of. So an example is like the hand wash area, the walk-in cooler, the seating table, the trash area. And that's a great way for people, if they have, 6 minutes to stand around before lunch or before the end of the day when other people are still working, they can go work on their area of tidiness. And we get a tidy farm, they get a tidy workplace, and nobody's standing around. So that works well. We have done in the past monthly meetings one-on-one with each employee. We dropped those mid-season last year just because people were leaving. We just had new employees all the time, and we didn't have time to sit down one-on-one, and people weren't here long enough for those to be really meaningful. So we will implement them again once it seems like we have a solid crew. I think they're beneficial. They just don't always work out for us. We have performance-based raises and promotions, again, after a certain amount of time of employment with us. So we've made numerous offers of higher wages and promotions to workers if they stay longer or stay through the next season. We just haven't had anyone take us up on it yet. But those are, we definitely value multi-year workers and people who know our systems and practices, and we're willing to pay for it. I just think, a small farm isn't paying the same wages as a tech company, or even some of the, retail jobs in town. We're just not able to. So we offer our employees the best packages we can, and someday they'll take us up on it. Our workers are first trained by us, by Spencer and I, then they practice the task on their own, and then they can train others. That's kind of how we do it to maintain consistency. And then we work side by side with our employees as much as possible. Usually for, 6 of 8 hours of every day, we're working with our employees, and that helps with camaraderie, helps with consistency, helps them learn how to do things faster and more efficiently. And it's just a more fun work environment. We also have a lot of signs, standard operating procedures written up, and templates created to help workers know exactly what we're looking for. So next slide. We pay hourly, like I said, 17 or 18 an hour this season, to the nearest quarter hour. So employees are logging their hours each day on a timesheet for us. We pay workers' compensation insurance, and the non-monetary compensation, which for our workers includes a CSA share and as much extras or seconds produce as they want. Those things are on top of their wage. We built a cabin. We needed to address the housing situation for our area and our employees. And so we spent the last year building a small cabin that one of our workers this year is living in. And it's the employee is paying us rent. It's totally above board. The employee pays us rent, market rate, and we pay her wage on top of that. That's the clearest thing for our accounting, and that's the clearest way to do it legally that we could come up with. And it got us a worker. We wouldn't have a full crew without the cabin housing someone. So it was a good move, although it was a pretty big undertaking. We hire workers through the job site called Indeed, Good Food Jobs. We have a few university contacts, and then we put up posters around town. We've gotten jobs or applicants through all of those avenues. And then we hire a bookkeeper to do all of our payroll. So she sets up direct deposit for our employees' paychecks. She files all the W-4s, W-2s, and takes care of all the legal withholdings. We pay her a monthly fee to do all that for us, and it's just off our brains, and we know she's doing a good job. So I think that's worthwhile. Next slide. So in our employee handbook, these are some things that we feel are important to pass on to our employees. We have our mission statement. We have a bunch of facts about the farm because, like it or not, the employees are kind of our ambassadors out in the world, and we want them to be, speaking the truth. We talk about our weekly and seasonal workflow, so the workers kind of know what's coming. We have a cell phone policy while at work. We have a time off policy. We clearly list the requirements for the season end bonus. We list our own food safety requirements. We list ground rules, things like always try your best, be kind, bring a positive attitude to work. And then our second produce policy. Next slide. So these are some of our templates that we've come up with that kind of help with that harvest consistency. So we have one for leeks, cilantro / all of the herbs, parsley, dill, bok choy, radishes, and then those dowels are that's a carrot bunch size. So we find those to be really helpful. They're quite dirty because they're used a lot, and those are helpful. Next slide. Here's a picture of our employee area, including our whiteboard and the spot where they can hang up their coats and store their walkie-talkies. And then inside the walk-in cooler, there's a shelf that is just for employee produce. So someone's working on radishes and they find one with a insect hole and they put it on the employee shelf, and they can take that home at the end of the day. Next slide. So the following slides are some of the signs that we have up on around our like packing area mostly. Our Best By dates, our destination stickers. These are for our wholesale products. So everybody knows these are what as soon as we get questions, the same question over and over from employees, we just make a sign and put it up so everybody knows. Okay, next slide. What done looks like in the packing area. This was crucial. At the end of the packing day, things were kind of a mess, and we just realized we needed to make it very clear what we were looking for. So we have a picture of what the packing table needs to look like, and then a description also. Next slide. And then how to label boxes refers to our waxed produce boxes that we send out to our grocery stores. They all need to be labeled a particular way so that the produce managers know what's in the box, and so our delivery driver knows where the box is going, etc. And then how to label transplants is another one we got questions about all the time. We also have signs up for how we mix our different types of potting soil. We have a sign up reminding people to keep the cooler door shut and turn the light off. Yeah, like I said, anytime we get a question multiple times or see the same mistake over and over, we just create a sign for it, and that seems to help a lot. Next slide. That's it. All right. I think I'll take questions, but thank you so much for letting me present today.
Thanks so much, Catherine, for sharing, how you work with employees and all the different policies and procedures you put together. If anybody has a question, you can definitely put that into the chat. And I think one of the questions that I have is, you talked about this two-way communication, where there's an opportunity for, you're communicating, like, here's what the rules are around our farm and what the expectations are. How does that communication flow from the employee back to you if they have questions or concerns?
Right. Well, we work so closely with our employees that we kind of make it an open door policy. We're weeding carrots or seeding radishes, and we kind of make it, we're open to people can bring up any issue they have at any time, since we're working right there with them. It's not like we're up in an office while they're out in the field. So there's that, we're available. But then we also let everybody know that those morning meetings are a great time to bring up issues. And also those one-on-one meetings, when we were able to hold them, that really took care of everything. People could get things off their chest. And sometimes we'd say, you know what, that's a great suggestion, but we can't do it. Sorry. But at least we've communicated about it. So those things tend to help, but honestly, we get the most dialogue going when we're just working side by side. I'll say, hey, do you feel like you have all the tools you need? And they'll say, yeah, but the broad fork's broken and that's really annoying. And we'll say, you know what, you're right. We need to fix our broad fork. And meanwhile, we're getting our carrots seeded. So that's pretty much how we approach it.
Yeah, thanks. We had a couple questions that came in. The first one is, when hiring an employee, do you request references to contact or conduct a background check?
We do request references, and we always call them. That's been pretty helpful for us in the past. And we don't do background checks other than our delivery driver. We do a license check on them.
Great, thank you. And then another question that came in, other than distance to travel or wages, what type of constructive feedback have your employees given you during your meetings or exit interviews?
Sometimes we've gotten constructive criticism about our management style, which is fine. That's great. We understand it can be hard to have two bosses. Basically, Spencer and I are equal bosses to everybody, and we've gotten not really complaints, but just people have said it's a little confusing to have two bosses, and we totally understand. So yeah, constructive criticism about our management style. Sometimes it's little things like, we hate having to dump the microgreens far away because you have to trudge through the snow to get to the pile. Is there something else you could do about that? And then, yeah, we put that on the whiteboard as a topic to discuss later and try and figure out a solution. Sometimes the issue is I want more time off, and we can't honor that. And then there's a little bit of friction there, but we have boundaries that we have to hold. Yeah, not too much, but we're always open, and we try and let everybody know that, so they don't feel like they have to be stuck in a bad situation for any amount of time.
That's great. Another question that came in is, do you have or have you used woofers, so willing workers on organic farms? If so, any thoughts?
We've not used them, and that's by design. Partly we're kind of scared of the labor laws. And we don't want to violate anything, and kind of we feel like I know we can be wrong about this, but we feel like you get what you pay for. And so if we're taking on free labor, it really depends on the individual, what kind of work they're able to do for you. And we kind of we just want to compensate people well and expect them to do a good job. And if we're not compensating them at all, we can't really expect them to do a good job, and then we don't know how they're going to act on our farm. So we don't take woofers, and that's by design, but I know they can work out well in certain situations.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that came in. And thanks
Great.
both to you, Catherine, and to Carmen for being speakers today, talking about farm labor. I know it's such an important and challenging topic, and we really appreciate your, sharing your information, and Carmen sharing the rules around farm labor. I'm going to quickly go ahead and share my screen again. Let's see, I think I'm having a little bit of a technical challenge, so just 1 second. Are you seeing my slides again?
Yes.
I am really sorry. I'm not sure exactly what happened with my presentation, but it is actually not coming up on my site to be.
Okay.
how I want it to be.
Give me 1 second and I'll just throw it up for you.
So again, I apologize. It's like a technical difficulty day. So I wanted to let you all know that we really appreciate your being on the webinar today. And definitely please consider signing up for our future webinars. We do have a short evaluation that is going to generate automatically at the end of today's webinar. Please provide us your feedback. That feedback is so important, as our webinars are really designed to meet your needs as small farmers and ranchers. And if you can tell us what those needs are and how we've done, we really appreciate your time. It should take just about 3 minutes to do that particular evaluation. So our next webinar series is going to be March 28th and 29th. You can sign up for those webinars from our website if you haven't done that already. We are recording these webinars, and they will be recorded and posted on our recorded webinars page. Also, I wanted to encourage you to sign up for the Cultivating Success newsletter. We have a free e-newsletter that comes out at least monthly. It's where we share all of our educational programs. And also, we are going to be publishing a new guide for farm direct marketing that's going to provide links and resources around a lot of topics that we're talking about in this series and more. So we're going to provide some information on basics on insurance and liability, labor, business structures, specific products, rules, and the like. If you sign up for our newsletter, you'll already be getting an announcement for when that is published, and you'll get information about where to find it online or how to sign up to receive a free printed copy in the mail. With that, thank you again for joining today's webinar. We hope you have a really great rest of your day, and that we get to see you again on March 28th.